The room went completely silent. Not the kind of silence that falls when someone says something awkward. No, this was the kind of silence that falls when something breaks that can never be fixed again. 40 people seated around the longest dining table Amara had ever seen in her life, all of them frozen, forks halfway to their mouths, eyes wide, staring at the woman standing at the head of the table. Emeka Williams had just laughed, loudly, at her husband, her disabled husband. The man sitting in a wheelchair at the other end of the table, the man who had bought every single piece of jewelry she was wearing that night, the man whose name she carried, the man who had built the empire she was enjoying, that man had just asked her to pass him a glass of water. And she had laughed, looked around at the guests, smiled like she was on stage, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Emeka, you have 2 hands. Use them, unless those stopped working too." Nobody moved. Amara stood near the kitchen door, holding a tray of drinks. She had been in this house for only 3 weeks. She was just a house girl, a maid. She had no business saying anything. But her hands were shaking so hard the glasses on her tray were making small noises against each other, and she had to grip the tray tighter to stop herself from dropping everything. She looked at Emeka Williams. He had not moved, had not blinked, had not said a single word. He just sat there in his wheelchair at the far end of that long table, surrounded by his relatives and business partners and family friends, and he quietly reached for the water himself, his jaw tight, his eyes calm, his face showing nothing. But Amara saw it. She saw the exact moment something died behind his eyes. And something told her, deep in her chest where she kept the things she was not allowed to say out loud, that tonight was not the beginning of this story. This had been happening for a long time, long before she arrived, long before the wheelchair, long before everything. She just didn't know yet how deep the wound went. But she was about to find out. If you enjoy thrilling African stories full of betrayal, love, and justice, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and tell us where you are watching from. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what happened at that dinner table, you need to understand who Emeka Williams really was. 6 months before that dinner, Emeka Williams was not a man anybody dared to laugh at. Not publicly, not privately, not even in whispers behind closed doors. He was 40 years old and he had built one of the fastest growing technology companies in West Africa from nothing, absolutely nothing, starting with 1 laptop, 1 small room in Surulere, and a brain that never stopped working. By the time he was 35, his company had offices in Lagos, Abuja, Accra, and Nairobi. His name appeared in business magazines. Governors called him for advice. Young men pasted his photo on their vision boards. He drove 3 different cars depending on his mood. He lived in a compound in Banana Island so large that Amara, the first time she saw it, thought it was a hotel. He had a swimming pool, a home cinema, a gym, a library, and staff quarters that were honestly better than most people's main houses. And he had Ngozi.
Ngozi Adeze Williams, born Ngozi Eze, the most beautiful woman in any room she walked into. She had the kind of face that made strangers stop mid-sentence and forget what they were saying. Tall, dark, sharp cheekbones, a voice like slow music. She wore clothes the way other women wore skin, like they were made specifically for her body. When she and Emeka walked into events together, people stared. They looked like a magazine cover. They looked like the life everyone wanted. But here is what nobody saw. Behind closed doors, Ngozi had a coldness to her that had nothing to do with temperature. She spoke to house staff like they were furniture. She ordered food at restaurants and sent it back 3 times just to assert power. She borrowed money from Emeka's accounts without telling him and explained it with, "It's my money too." She didn't wake up early. She didn't cook. She didn't ask about his day unless there was something she needed. Emeka knew all of this. He was not a blind man, but he was a man who had grown up watching his father hold his family together through every storm, and he believed deeply that marriage was something you fought for. So he fought, quietly, patiently. He bought her gifts when she was cold. He gave her space when she was difficult. He told himself she would come around. He told himself that underneath all that hardness, she loved him. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Thursday, late. He was driving back from a business meeting in Victoria Island, rain falling so hard the wipers could barely keep up with it. He was tired. He had been in meetings since 7 that morning. He was thinking about Ngozi actually, thinking that he would stop somewhere and buy her favorite chin-chin from that small shop she liked near the bridge, just to see her smile for a moment before bed. He never made it to that shop. The truck came from nowhere. Or that's how the witnesses described it later, from nowhere. A massive truck that had lost control on the wet road, sliding sideways across 3 lanes, and Emeka's car was simply in the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. The impact was so violent that the car spun off the road and hit the concrete divider. The paramedics said he was lucky to be alive. His spine didn't agree with the word lucky. When he woke up in St. Nicholas Hospital 4 days later, Ngozi was sitting beside his bed. She looked like she had been crying. She held his hand. She said all the right things. She said he was going to be fine. She said they would get through this together. She said she loved him. She said she wasn't going anywhere. Emeka believed her.
He didn't know yet that people can say the right things while already planning their exit. The first week, she came to the hospital every day. The second week, she came 5 times. The third week, 3 times. By the 4th week, she was sending the driver with food flasks and calling it a visit. When Emeka finally came home, still unable to walk, moved around in a wheelchair that felt like a cage, Ngozi had already started to drift into a version of herself that was even colder than before. She stopped sitting with him in the evenings. She started going out at nights without explanation. She began responding to his calls with voice notes instead of actual calls, saying she was busy, she was tired, she had things to do. She redecorated the living room without asking him. She invited her friends over and laughed loudly in other rooms while he sat alone reading business reports in his study. She wore perfume that wasn't for him and came home smelling like it had mixed with someone else's air. But she stayed. She was still there, still sleeping in the same house. And Emeka, who had built a company through nothing but stubborn hope, told himself she was just adjusting, just struggling, just going through her own grief about what had happened to him. He gave her time. He gave her too much time. Amara Okonkwo arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 months after Emeka came home from the hospital. She was 23 years old, and she came to the gate of the Banana Island compound carrying a small Ghana Moscow bag in one hand and a folded paper in the other. The paper with a job advertisement on it, creased from how many times she had read it on the bus. She had never been to Banana Island before. She had grown up in Ajegunle, in a 1-room apartment she shared with her aunt's husband, and 4 cousins. Her parents had died when she was 6, a generator fire in the middle of the night, the kind of thing that happens in a city where power cuts are as regular as sunrise. She remembered nothing about them except the feeling of her mother's hand on her forehead when she had a fever, warm and heavy and safe. After their death, she moved between relatives the way a bucket moves between people at a well. Nobody kept her because they wanted her. They kept her because throwing her out completely would have looked bad. She cooked, she cleaned, she carried water. She was quiet when she was told to be quiet and invisible when she was told to be invisible. She went to primary school, but secondary school was where the funding ran out, and by 16 she was working full-time in other people's houses, learning the particular art of being useful without being seen.
She was not stupid. She was not uneducated. She had read more books than most people she knew, borrowing them from churches, from market stalls, from the small mobile library that sometimes parked near the estate on Saturday mornings. She read at night by the light of her phone, novels and history books and business biographies and anything she could find. Reading was the one place nobody could tell her she didn't belong. When she saw the advert for a live-in domestic staff position in Banana Island, she knew it was out of her league. She applied anyway. Because Amara had learned a long time ago that the only opportunities she would ever get in this life were the ones she reached for herself. The man who interviewed her at the gate was Emmanuel, the head of household staff, a serious man with reading glasses and a clipboard. He asked her 3 questions. Could she cook? Yes. Could she be discreet? Yes. Could she follow instructions without asking unnecessary questions? Yes. He wrote something on his clipboard and said, "Start Monday." What he didn't tell her was what she was walking into. She found out herself, slowly, the way you discover a leak in a roof. First one small drop, then another, then you look up and see the whole ceiling is wet. The first sign was the way Ngozi looked at her on her first day. Not the way employers look at new staff with assessment or authority, but the way a woman looks at another woman when she is trying to figure out if she is competition. Quick, scanning, then deliberately dismissive, the way you look away from something after you have decided it doesn't matter. Amara was not stupid. She filed that look away. The second sign was Emeka himself. She had expected to meet someone crushed, someone who looked the way people look when everything has gone wrong. And yes, he looked tired. Yes, his eyes had heaviness in them, like a man carrying weight he couldn't put down. But he also looked at her with something she hadn't expected. Curiosity. "Sit," he said, the first time they spoke in his study. She sat. "Where are you from?" "Ajekon, sir." He nodded. "Have you done this work before?" "Yes, sir, many years." He was quiet for a moment. "You're not afraid?" It wasn't a question. She answered anyway. "No, sir." He tilted his head. "Why not?" She thought about it honestly. "I've walked in harder places than this." Something moved behind his eyes, something that looked almost like the beginning of his smile. "All right," he said. "You can start." She went back to the kitchen and started preparing his afternoon meal. And she already knew, in the way she knew things she couldn't fully explain, that this house was not what it looked like from outside, and that her being here was not an accident.
The days that followed had a pattern. Emeka woke early. He was already in his study by 6, working on his tablet, making calls, reading documents. His company had not stopped running just because he could not walk. He ran it from that wheelchair with the same intensity he had always had. Maybe more, because the wheelchair had stripped away everything else and left only the work. Ngozi woke late, sometimes past 10. She came downstairs in silk robes, made Amara feel small with her eyes before she had spoken a single word, and then moved through the house like she owned it, which technically she did, or believed she did, and floated back out again in the evenings, dressed in things that cost more than Amara made in a year. Amara cooked, she cleaned, she helped Emeka with things he needed physical help with, moving things from shelves, reaching things he couldn't reach, wheeling him from room to room on days when his shoulders were tired. She did it all without making him feel small, and this was the hardest part, the most important part, the thing she had figured out early, that the worst thing you could do for a proud man was treat him like he was helpless when he wasn't. She treated him like a man who had a temporary problem with his legs, nothing more. And slowly, very slowly, like a plant finding the direction of light, Emeka began to unfold. He started talking to her, not about surface things, not about meals and cleaning schedules, but about real things. He told her about the company he had built. She asked questions, and he could see she actually understood the answers, which surprised him enough that he asked her where she went to school. When she told him she had only finished primary school, he went quiet for a moment in a way that seemed like recalculating. Then he said, "You should have gone to university." "I know," she said simply. He looked at her for a long time after that. She didn't tell him she cried that night, in her small room in the staff quarters, pressing her face into her pillow so nobody would hear. Not because she was sad about the past, but because for the first time in a very long time, someone had seen her clearly enough to say what she deserved. Meanwhile, Ngozi was watching. She came home one afternoon and found Emeka laughing. Actually laughing, shoulders moving, head tilted back, the kind of laugh that uses your whole face. Amara was telling him something, a story about a bus ride she had taken that morning, something small and funny. Ngozi stood in the doorway for a moment. Her eyes moved from Emeka's face to Amara's face and back again. Then she turned and walked to the bedroom without saying anything.
That evening, she called Amara to her room. "You're here to clean and cook," Ngozi said. Her voice was quiet, but her eyes were sharp as a blade. "You're not here to entertain my husband." "Yes, ma," Amara said. "I understand, ma." "Good," Ngozi said. Then after a pause that felt calculated, "And don't let me catch you making eyes at him. Girls like you come to houses like this with one goal. I see you clearly." Amara said nothing. What she wanted to say would have gotten her fired. What she said was, "I'm only here to work, ma." Ngozi smiled with only her mouth. "Make sure it stays that way." Amara left the room and went back to the kitchen and chopped onions for a very long time.
It was around this period that Emeka began to notice things that made something cold settle in his chest. Ngozi came home one night at 2 in the morning. He was still awake. He often couldn't sleep. And he heard her heels on the tile downstairs, heard her moving quietly like she was trying not to be caught. He checked his phone. He had called her 4 times, 4 missed calls sitting there unanswered. In the morning, she told him she had been at her friend Tola's house. He said nothing. He just noted it, added it to the list of things he was noting. He started checking small things. The security cameras he had installed throughout the compound were connected to an app on his phone, part of a system his own company had built. He had never felt the need to use them for anything other than security. He started using them now. He watched Ngozi walk out of the gate at night, watched her get into a car that wasn't a taxi, watched her not come back until almost morning. He saw enough. He didn't need to see more. But he said nothing yet. He was building a case, the way he built businesses, quietly, carefully, without showing his hand. What he didn't know was that across town, in the apartment of a man named Tobena, the man whose car Ngozi kept getting into, a different kind of plan was also being built. The family dinner happened on a Friday evening. It was Emeka's mother's idea, Mama Chioma, a small, fierce woman from Enugu who drove to Lagos once a month to check on her son. She had suggested it casually over the phone. Let's have a family dinner, something nice, invite some people. And Ngozi had agreed so quickly and enthusiastically that it should have raised questions. But it didn't.
40 people came. Emeka's mother, his 2 brothers and their wives, cousins, family friends, a few business partners. Ngozi organized everything. The food, the seating, the decor, the music playing softly from speakers in the corners of the dining room. She wore a red dress that made everyone look twice. She moved through the room welcoming people like a woman who had something to prove. Amara worked the kitchen with 2 other staff, bringing out trays of food, keeping drinks filled, staying invisible the way good staff know how to be invisible. It was when the main course was being served that it happened. Emeka was at the far end of the table. He had been quiet most of the evening, listening more than talking, the way he sometimes did in large groups. His younger brother Chiki was telling a story that had people laughing. Emeka reached across the table for the water jug. It was just slightly beyond his reach. He turned to Ngozi, who was 3 seats down from him, and said simply, "Ngozi, can you pass the water?" What happened next, Amara saw clearly from the kitchen doorway, where she was standing with a tray. Ngozi looked at Emeka. Then she looked at the table of guests around her. Then she smiled, the performance kind, the kind you practice in a mirror. And she said in a voice that was clearly intended to carry, "Emeka, you have 2 hands. Use them. Unless those stopped working too." Laughter. Her laughter first, then the uncomfortable, nervous, not sure what to do laughter of 2 or 3 people who hadn't understood yet what had just happened. Then silence as it spread to the rest of the table. Emeka did not react. That was the thing. He just reached for the water himself, poured his glass, set the jug down, and looked at something on the wall across from him. His face was empty. His jaw was working, just slightly, like he was chewing something tough. Emeka's nota, Mama Chioma, put her fork down. She looked at Ngozi. The look was not angry. It was worse. It was the look of a woman who had just confirmed something she had been suspecting for a long time. She said nothing. She just folded her hands in her lap and looked at the tablecloth. Amara's tray was shaking. She carried it back to the kitchen and set it on the counter and stood there for a moment, pressing her palms flat on the cold granite, breathing slowly. She had grown up in houses where people spoke to her like she was nothing. She knew how that felt. She carried it in her body, in the way she automatically made herself smaller in doorways and waited for permission before sitting. She knew what it felt like to be humiliated and have to swallow it because you had no power. Emeka Williams had all the power in the world before that accident. And this woman was using his moment of vulnerability to strip it from him piece by piece, publicly, in front of his family. Amara wanted to walk back into that dining room and say something. She stood at the kitchen counter and actively stopped herself. But she was not the one who acted first. Mama Chioma stood up, quietly at the other end of the table. She pushed her chair back. She walked around the whole table, past all 40 seated people, walked all the way to where Emeka was sitting. She picked up the water jug. She poured his glass for him. She put her hand on his shoulder for a brief moment. She said nothing. She walked back to her seat and sat down and picked up her fork. Nobody at that table misunderstood that moment.
Ngozi laughed again, lighter this time, like it didn't matter, but her eyes were cold. The dinner ended early. People had things to do, places to be, excuses that came quickly. Within an hour, the table was nearly empty. Mama Chioma was the last guest to leave. She hugged Emeka for a long time. She did not hug Ngozi. She walked to her car without looking back. After everyone left, the house was very quiet. Amara was clearing dishes from the table when she heard Emeka's wheelchair moving down the hallway towards his study. Ngozi was upstairs somewhere. She heard the study door close. She stood in the dining room holding a stack of plates, and she thought about the evening, and then she thought about the weeks she had spent in this house, and she thought about all the small things she had seen and noted and filed away. And she made a decision, quietly, the way she made most of her decisions, without announcement, without drama. She was not going to be invisible in this house, not anymore, not when a man was being slowly destroyed in front of her. She wasn't sure yet what she was going to do, but she knew she was going to do something. 3 days after the dinner, Ngozi knocked on Amara's door in the staff quarters. Amara opened it, and Ngozi walked in without being invited, looked around the small room the way rich people look at poor people's spaces, like they're doing a calculation, and then sat on the edge of the bed like it was her bed. "Sit," she said. Amara sat on the plastic chair near the wardrobe.
Nosy crossed her legs and looked at her nails. "I've been watching you," she said conversationally. "You're smart, smarter than the other girls I've had here." Amara said nothing. "I have a proposal for you," Nosy continued. "I can sponsor you to study abroad. I have contacts. You could be in the UK by next year. Proper university, full sponsorship." She let that sit in the air for a moment. "All I need is a small favor in return." Amara felt something cold move through her, starting at the back of her neck and going down. "What favor, Ma?" she asked carefully. Nosy reached into the pocket of her robe and took out a small container, clear plastic, inside it a fine white powder. She placed it on the small table near Amara's bed, like she was placing a gift. "Add this to his evening soup," she said simply. "Just a little. He won't taste it." Silence. Amara looked at the container. Then she looked at Nosy's face. And Nosy's face, she noticed, was completely calm. The face of a woman who had thought about this, planned it, decided it was reasonable. The face of a woman who had crossed a line so quietly, she didn't even feel the moment she crossed it. "What is it?" Amara asked. "Medicine," Nosy said. "He refuses to take his supplements. He's stubborn. I just need you to help me give it to him properly." She said it like this was normal, like she was asking Amara to remind him about his blood pressure pills. Amara said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "Let me think about it, Ma." Nosy looked at her with something that wasn't quite his smile. "Don't think too long," she said. Then she stood up and walked out, leaving the small container on the table. Amara sat alone in that small room for a very long time. She did not touch the container. She looked at it from across the room like it was an animal that might move. Her hands were very still. Her mind was going very fast. She thought about the UK. She thought about university. She thought about the life she had dreamed about in all those books she had read by the light of her phone. She thought about all of it. And then she thought about Emeka, sitting at the end of that long table, reaching for water, and the emptiness that had moved behind his eyes. She thought about her mother's hand on her forehead, warm, heavy, safe. She wrapped the container in a piece of cloth and put it at the bottom of her bag. Then she went to sleep, or she tried to.
In the morning, she was up before 5, sweeping the corridor outside Emeka's study. She heard him inside already. She could see the light under the door. She knocked once, softly. "Come in," he said. She came in with a tray. Morning tea. She set it on his desk. He thanked her without looking up from his screen. She was almost at the door when she stopped. She stood there for a moment with her back to him. She could feel his eyes on her back, the way you feel attention even without seeing it. "Sir," she said. "Yes." She turned around. She crossed the room. She sat in the chair across from his desk without being invited, and he raised his eyebrows slightly but didn't stop her. She reached into the pocket of her uniform and put the container on his desk. She watched his face. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. He said nothing. "She asked me to put it in your soup," Amara said. "She said it was medicine." She paused. I didn't put it in your soup. The silence lasted a long time. Emeka picked up the container. He turned it in his fingers slowly. His face gave away nothing. The same face he had worn at that dinner table, completely empty on the surface, working very hard underneath. You're sure about what you're telling me, he said. It was not quite a question. Yes, sir. He set the container down. He looked at the wall to the left. Then he looked back at her. Thank you, he said. His voice was very flat. You can go. She went. By noon, his personal assistant had taken the container to a laboratory for analysis, discreetly, no questions, the way things got done when you had money and your name still meant something. By 5 o'clock, the results were back. Not a supplement, not medicine, not even something to make you sleep. Something that, taken in small amounts over time, would attack the kidneys, would present symptoms that looked like natural deterioration in a man already recovering from a serious accident, would be very difficult to trace. Emeka sat with the laboratory report on his desk for a long time. He called his lawyer. He called his private investigator, a man named Festus who had worked for him for 6 years and who knew how to be quiet about what he found. Then he sent a message to Amara. Carry on as normal. Don't say anything. He would handle it. Amara carried on as normal. She made dinner. She served it. She answered Ngozi's questions with her face empty and her voice steady. Ngozi asked her, casually, sideways, the next evening, did you do what I asked? Amara said, yes, ma. Ngozi smiled and went back to her phone. That smile. Amara would remember that smile. The following weekend, Emeka announced there would be another gathering.
Not 40 people this time, just the inner circle. His 2 brothers, Chike and Obina, his mother, Ngozi's parents, who lived in Lagos and who Emeka had maintained a polite, careful relationship with throughout the marriage. 2 of Emeka's most trusted business partners. Ngozi organized it again. She bought a new outfit. She seemed cheerful, actually cheerful, more relaxed than she had been in weeks. She moved around the house humming. Amara watched her and felt sick. The guests arrived on Saturday afternoon. The weather was good. They sat in the large garden behind the house, under a canopy, eating and talking. Mama Chioma arrived first and went directly to sit beside Emeka and held his hand and spoke quietly to him in Igbo for several minutes. His brothers came together, boisterous and loud, the way they always were, the kind of loud that fills a space comfortably. Ngozi's parents arrived last, her father a retired civil servant with a quiet dignity, her mother a plump, cheerful woman who kissed everyone on both cheeks. Everything looked normal. Everything felt normal. Until Emeka reached into the pocket of his agbada and placed a folder on the garden table. He said in a voice that carried across the garden without being raised, I want everyone present to see something. People looked up. Ngozi, who was pouring juice at the other end of the table, went very still. Emeka opened the folder. He took out the laboratory report first. He laid it flat on the table. Then he took out photographs, images from the security camera footage, printed in clear color. Ngozi at the gate late at night, getting into a car, the face of the man driving the car clear in the camera light. Then he took out his phone and pressed play on a recording. The voice that came out of the speaker was Ngozi's voice, saying, add this to his evening soup. Just a little, he won't taste it. The garden went so quiet Amara could hear the neighbor's generator 2 houses away. Ngozi's mother made a sound like she had been hit. Ngozi herself did not move for a moment. Then she laughed, short and harsh. That's been manipulated. He could have faked. You can fake anything with technology. He builds technology. Ngozi, her father said, just that, just her name, in a voice so quiet and heavy it stopped her completely.
She looked at her father. Her father was looking at the photographs. He was not looking at her. Emeka said, I've spoken with my lawyer. The divorce papers are already prepared. I've also provided everything here to the police. What happens next regarding criminal charges is up to them and not up to me. He closed the folder. I wanted the family present for this because she used this house, this family, this name to conduct herself this way, and the family deserves to know. Ngozi's mother was crying now, quietly, with her hand over her mouth. Chike, Emeka's younger brother, stood up. He walked around the table to stand beside Emeka's wheelchair. He put his hand on Emeka's shoulder and stood there, just stood there. Obina, the older brother, came and stood on the other side. Mama Chioma had not moved. She was sitting very straight. Her eyes were on Ngozi. She said in a voice so controlled it was frightening, "Pack your things." Ngozi left that evening. She called her friend to come with a car. She carried 2 bags and left everything else, the clothes, the jewelry, the designer shoes,
She left them because they belonged to the house and the house was not hers. Her mother went with her. Her father did not. Her father sat with Emeka for 3 hours in the study after everyone else had gone. 2 men sitting in silence, with occasional words, the older man's face carrying an old particular grief that had nothing to do with Emeka and everything to do with knowing your child has become someone you don't recognize. When he left, he hugged Emeka at the gate for a long time and said, "I'm sorry, my son." Emeka said, "It's not your fault, sir." The older man drove away and Emeka watched his tail lights until they turned the corner. Amara was in the kitchen when he wheeled himself back inside. He came to the kitchen doorway and stopped. "Go and rest," he said. "You've done enough today." She was about to agree when she looked at his face. The public face was gone. What was underneath it was very tired. Not the tired that sleep fixes. "Come and sit outside for a moment," she said, before she could stop herself. He looked at her. "Just for a moment," she said. He came outside. They sat in the garden, in the dark, the night air warm and full of the smell of someone's pepper soup drifting from a neighboring house. The security lights were low. Somewhere a dog was barking and then stopped. Amara sat on the garden bench. Emeka's wheelchair was beside her.
He said, after a long time, I knew. For months. I knew something was wrong. He was not talking to her exactly. He was talking to the duck. I just kept hoping I was wrong. He laughed, small and humorless. I built a whole company on trusting my instincts, and I spent months ignoring my own instincts in my own house. Amara said, "You wanted to be wrong. That's not the same as ignoring. You loved her. You are giving her time to be different." He turned to look at her. "She couldn't be different," Amara said quietly. "Some people show you who they are, and you keep looking for the other version. But the version you saw is the real one." He was quiet for a moment. "Where did you learn that?" he said. "I've lived it," she said simply. He nodded. They sat in silence for a while. It was not uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence between people who don't need to fill space with noise. "You could have taken what she offered," he said eventually. "The UK, university. That's not nothing. You have nothing right now, don't you?" It wasn't said to wound her. It was said plainly, man who appreciates facts. "I have my name," Amara said. "I have what I know about myself. Those are not nothing." He looked at the garden for a long time. "No," he said, "they are not." In the weeks that followed, the house changed. The coldness that had lived in it even before Amara arrived, the heaviness she had felt the first day she walked in, it started to lift. Slowly, not dramatically, not all at once, just the way a room gets lighter when someone opens a curtain. Emeka walked. He walked hard, harder than before actually, as if something that had been blocking his energy had been removed. He had video calls with his team in Accra. He reviewed the quarterly reports for the Nairobi office. He had long conversations with his chief technology officer about a new product they were building. He started exercising. Amara found a YouTube video of a physiotherapist showing upper body exercises for people with spinal injuries, and she showed it to him casually one morning. Just left her phone open on the desk beside his coffee and said, "I saw this." He didn't say anything, but the next morning, he was doing the exercises. His brothers visited more often. Chike came one weekend and they watched football together and shouted at the television until midnight, the way brothers do. Mama Chioma called every day now, not every week, every day. Brief calls, just checking, just hearing his voice. And Amara cooked and cleaned and did her work, and also, alongside the work, she existed. She said things she thought, she laughed when something was funny, she disagreed with Emeka once about something he said about a book she had read, and she held her ground when he pushed back, and he had looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something between surprise and something else entirely. She didn't examine that expression too closely.
She had spent enough of her life in other people's houses to know that gratitude and liking someone felt different from being safe. She had learned to be careful about the difference. But it was Mama Chioma who changed things, in the way mothers who love their children sometimes do, without announcing they're doing it. She came to Lagos one weekend and she found Amara alone in the kitchen preparing groundnut soup. And she came and sat at the kitchen table and said, "Tell me about yourself." Not the way employers ask, not assessing, actually asking. Amara told her. Not everything, but some things. Where she was from, the fire, the years of moving between relatives, the reading, the hoping, the way she had showed up at this gate with a Ghana Moscow bag and nothing else and asked for a chance. Mama Chioma listened the whole time without saying anything. At the end, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what I see when I look at you?" Amara waited. Someone who should have been broken 3 times over and decided every time not to be. Amara looked at the pot of soup so Mama Chioma wouldn't see her face. "My son," Mama Chioma said carefully, "has not laughed the way he laughs when you are around since before his accident. I want you to know I noticed that." Amara stirred the soup. "I'm just his staff, Ma," she said. Mama Chioma made a small sound that wasn't quite agreement. The police arrested Tubena, the man in the photographs, 6 weeks after the garden confrontation. The investigators Emeka had hired had put together a picture that went beyond just the affair. Tubena had been helping Ngozi move money out of Emeka's accounts. Small amounts, regular amounts, the kind of pattern that's easier to miss than a large single theft. They had been doing it for almost a year. The money had been going into a separate account in Ngozi's name that Emeka had never known existed.
Ngozi was arrested at her friend's apartment in Lekki on a Thursday morning. She called Emeka from the police station. He picked up. She was crying. Her voice was very different from the voice she usually had, stripped of the performance, just a frightened woman in trouble. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't made for things to go this far. She said she loved him. She said she had made terrible mistakes and she knew it, and she was asking him to forgive her, to please forgive her, to please help her. Emeka listened to all of it. Then he said quietly, "Ngozi, you looked at me sitting in that wheelchair, completely unable to defend myself, and you decided to use that moment to destroy me. Not in a moment of anger, not by accident. You planned it. You looked at my helplessness and you chose it as your opportunity." He paused. "I have nothing for you, not anymore." He ended the call. Amara was nearby in the corridor. She hadn't heard the words, just the tone of his voice through the closed door. When he opened the study door and found her standing there, he didn't seem surprised. He said, "She's been arrested." "I know," Amara said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to stand up now." She blinked. "Sir?" He locked the wheels of his wheelchair. He put both hands on the armrests. Slowly, with effort that was visible in every line of his body, he pushed himself upright. He stood, unsteady, holding the doorframe, but standing. Amara's hand went to her mouth. "I've been doing the exercises," he said, and there was something in his voice, not quite a smile, but the cousin of a smile. "For 3 weeks. Don't tell my physiotherapist I've been doing it from a YouTube video." She was laughing and crying at the same time, her hands pressed to her face. "Stop that," he said, but he was smiling now, fully, in a way she hadn't seen before, a smile that used his whole face. "How long?" she managed to ask. "I started getting some feeling back about a month after I came home," he said. "I didn't tell anyone. I needed to be sure. And I needed," he paused, seeming to choose words carefully, "I needed to see who was really here for me. Not for what I could give, for me." Amara went very still. He looked at her directly. "You were here," he said. The corridor was very quiet. "I'm your staff," she said, because she didn't know what else to say.
"You were here before you were my staff," he said. "You were the kind of person who was going to be here regardless of what I could give you. I saw it from the first week." He was still holding the doorframe, still standing. "I'm going to need some time to walk properly again. My physiotherapist says 3 or 4 more months of serious work, but I'm going to walk again." He looked at her. "And when I do, Amara, there are things I want to say to you properly, standing up, not from a chair." He paused. "But I'm telling you now that the things I want to say, I've wanted to say them for a while." Amara stood in the corridor of the most beautiful house she had ever been inside, in a life that had given her almost nothing. And she felt something she hadn't felt since she was 6 years old, and her mother put a warm hand on her forehead. Safe. She felt safe. The court case took 4 months. Ngozi's lawyer tried several things. Tried to argue the laboratory results were fabricated. Tried to argue the money transfers were authorized. Tried to argue the recording was manipulated. The prosecution had too much. The private investigator Festus had done thorough work. The testimony of 3 other household staff members who had been let go by Ngozi in the past year, women who had stories of their own, added weight to a case that was already heavy. Ngozi's father sat in the courtroom every day. He sat in the public gallery, and he never looked at his daughter when she was brought in. He looked at his hands. Amara saw him from across the courtroom and felt a complicated kind of sadness for him, the sadness of watching someone bury grief they did nothing to create. Ngozi was convicted on charges of conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm and financial fraud. The sentence was 8 years. When it was read out, Ngozi looked at Emeka. He was sitting in the front row in a regular chair, not a wheelchair. He had started using the chair for shorter periods. He wasn't walking freely yet, but he would. His physiotherapist had said by the next month. The improvement was faster than anyone had expected, which the physiotherapist attributed to Emeka's discipline, and the physio instructor credited to the YouTube exercises, which made Emeka and Amara make brief eye contact across the room, in a way that contained an entire conversation. Ngozi looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Amara, who was seated beside him. Her expression was strange, hard to read. Not angry exactly, more like a person who has lost a game they were certain they would win, and cannot quite understand where it went wrong.
Tobena got 6 years for financial fraud and conspiracy. Outside the courthouse, in the afternoon sun, Mama Chioma held both of Emeka's hands and cried properly for the first time. The kind of crying that is relief after long tension. Chike and Obina stood on either side of their brother, and one of them, Amara couldn't see which one, put an arm around him. Amara stood slightly apart. This was a family moment. She was still learning where she fitted. But then Emeka turned. He found her with his eyes, the way he always did now, automatically, like his eyes knew where she was. He held his hand out. Not to help her, just to have her there. She walked over and took his hand. Mama Chioma looked at their joined hands. Then she looked at Amara. She did not say anything. She smiled, small, with her eyes rather than her mouth. The way mothers smile when something they have hoped for quietly for a while finally shows itself. He walked for the first time without support on a Thursday afternoon, 5 months after the court case. Amara was in the garden with her book. She had taken to sitting in the garden in the afternoons now when her work was done. Emeka had told her to. He had said, "You're in this house, you might as well sit in the sun," and she had eventually stopped arguing about it. She heard the glass door open behind her. She looked up. He was walking, slowly, carefully. Each step deliberate and focused. No wheelchair, no crutches, no physiotherapist beside him. Just him, walking across the garden toward her in the afternoon sun. She stood up. He kept walking until he was standing directly in front of her. He was breathing slightly harder than normal from the effort. His eyes were bright. "I said I would do this standing up," he said. Amara was already pressing both hands flat against her chest like she was trying to keep her heart in. He reached into the pocket of his agbada, the same agbada he had worn to the garden confrontation months ago, and she understood this was deliberate. And he took out his small box. "I know you came to this house with a Ghana must-go bag and worn shoes," he said. His voice was steady. "I know you didn't come looking for anything except work and a chance to eat properly. I know that. I know exactly who you are and where you came from and what it cost you to be here." He opened the box. Inside it was a ring. Simple gold band. 1 diamond in the center. Brilliant and clear. And I know that none of that,
None of where you came from or what you owned tells you anything about what you're worth. You showed me that by example. He looked at her directly. Amara Okonko, will you marry me?
She was crying. She hadn't noticed when she started. "You the man I was afraid to hope for," she said, "for a very long time." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Yes, obviously yes." He laughed, that full laugh, that whole face laugh. He slid the ring onto her finger and she looked at it, and it caught the afternoon sun and threw light in all directions. They were married 6 months later. Not his small wedding. Mama Chioma would not permit a small wedding. It was the kind of wedding that took 3 months to plan and had 250 guests, and a band that played high life until 2 in the morning. It was held in Lagos, in a venue with a garden that had lights strung between the trees and the smell of jollof rice and pepper soup drifting through the warm evening air. Amara wore white and gold. Her hair was done by Mama Chioma's personal stylist, who had been dispatched to her with firm instructions. She had no family to be on her side of the aisle. This fact, which she had thought about quietly and alone for weeks, turned out not to matter the way she had feared, because Chike and Obina's wives had taken it upon themselves to fill that side with people who loved her now, cousins and friends and women from the church Mama Chioma attended, who had heard the story and wanted to be part of this particular ending. Emeka walked down the aisle. He walked on his own legs, without help. He walked slowly and deliberately the way he did everything now, like a man who understood the value of each step. And when he reached her and took her hands, the entire room went quiet for a moment. Not the bad kind of quiet, not the kind that fell at that dinner table months ago. This was the quiet that falls when something true happens in front of people and everyone feels it at the same time. Nguzi's father was in the back row. He had asked Emeka if he could come. Emeka had said yes without hesitation. The man sat quietly in the back row with his wife, and he cried through most of the ceremony, silent tears that he didn't try to stop. And Amara saw him and understood that those tears were for more than just this day. After the vows, when the pastor said, "You may greet your wife," Emeka put his hands on either side of Amara's face, the face of a girl from Ajekonle who had grown up in other people's houses and read books by phone light and arrived at a gate one Tuesday morning with nothing except herself. And he looked at her for a moment, the way you look at something you are glad you did not miss.
Then he kissed her, and the room came alive. There is a thing about people who grow up with nothing. They tend to understand what things are actually worth, not the price of things, the worth of things. They know the difference between a man who buys you diamonds and a man who tells you the truth. They know that loyalty in a hard moment is not the same as loyalty in an easy one. They know that the test of a person is not who they are when everything is going well, but who they are when everything isn't. Amara had always known these things. She had known them in her body since she was 6 years old and learned that the world did not owe her anything and would not give her anything she didn't reach for herself. And Emeka, a man who had built a company from nothing and lost the use of his legs and discovered that the person he trusted most had been quietly trying to end him, Emeka also knew these things now. He knew them in the new way, the way that goes all the way through a person. Not just the knowing in your head, but the knowing in your chest, where you keep the things that matter. He knew the difference between someone who stays because of what you have and someone who stays because of who you are. He had learnt it the hard way, but he had learnt it. And sometimes that is the point. Not to avoid the hard thing, but to come out the other side of it knowing something real. A year after the wedding, Emeka's company opened a new campus in Lagos, a full office complex that also housed a training facility for young technology professionals. The facility was named after Amara. Not by grand announcement, he just submitted the paperwork for the name and told her about it one morning over breakfast. She looked at the paperwork for a long time. The Emeka Williams Training Center, she read. For young people who didn't have access to education, Emeka said, watching her face. Young people who read by phone light and figure things out on their own and deserve a real chance. He paused. Also, you've been doing an online management course for 4 months and pretending I don't know. You're going to need somewhere to actually use what you're learning. She put the paperwork down and looked at him. You knew about the course? Amara, he said patiently. I built a technology company. Did you genuinely think I didn't know what was happening on the Wi-Fi in my own house?
She started laughing, really laughing. He was laughing too. Outside the window, the Lagos morning was loud and bright and full of itself, the way Lagos always is. Generator noise and traffic and somebody selling bread and somewhere a radio playing and the sun hitting everything without apology. And inside the kitchen of the house in Banana Island, a woman from Ajegunle, with a ring on her finger and a center named after her, looked at the man across the table from her and felt all the way through the simple, extraordinary fact of being exactly where she was supposed to be. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that your beginning does not determine your ending, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a story, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We read every single comment. Share this with someone who needs to hear today that a kind heart and an honest soul are worth more than anything this world can offer. Thank you for watching.